Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another great spotlight session. Today I have Miriam. I don't want to botch your last name.
Yudilevich.
Yudilevich, there it is. She is an appraiser. We had the opportunity to work together on one of my commercial listings I had a while ago, and she was very, informative about the process and how she did everything. And I thought she would make a really good candidate to come on Spotlight and give us a rundown on how she comes up with these prices for certain properties and things like that. So I'll let Miriam go ahead and take it away. I have no idea how she does what she does. So I'm going to let her explain it to you guys, okay? Miriam, thanks a lot for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is pretty interesting because I don't get an opportunity to talk to real estate agents at for an extended period of time. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Miriam Yudilevich. I've been a real estate appraiser for over 15 years. I focus on commercial real estate appraisals. I don't do a lot of residential work. My main focus lately has been I was just saying with land preservation. I've been doing a lot of land preservation, but we also do a lot of work for banks. We do, as an office, we do a lot of retail income producing apartments, industrial, and office properties throughout most of New Jersey, depending on the client. And we have a couple of appraisers in our office, so we tend to focus on the areas that we are familiar with. I guess today I was going to talk about how appraisers do what we do, how we think, how we go through the process of appraising one of your listings. And I'm going to start with the purpose of the appraisal is to estimate market value. And we have a specific definition of market value, and it doesn't vary. It's the probable price a property should bring in a competitive and open market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale, the buyer and seller each acting prudently, knowledgeably, and assuming the price is not affected by undue stimulus. It also assumes that the buyer and seller are typically motivated, both parties are well informed, a reasonable exposure time has occurred, that payment is made in cash or equivalent financing, and that the price represents normal market consideration without special financing or concessions. This definition is very important because as appraisers, we are reaching out to real estate agents and buyers and sellers all the time, trying to determine if a sale really was market value. Were the buyer and seller typically motivated? We need to find out from you or market participants if that's true. So this is where I think appraisers and real estate agents really can help each other out. Um, one Commercial appraisals, I'm sorry, estimate market value based on market evidence, economic principles, legal considerations, and a financial analysis of the property. It is not based on construction cost alone, a contract price. It's not based on owner expectations, and it's not based on tax assessments. We get those questions a lot. We get a lot of not just real estate agents, but owners asking, but the assessment so much lower or so much higher. That's not how we base market value. So we need to look at the market evidence, economics that are happening, the property characteristics, and like I said, financial analysis if it's an income producing property. As an example, we get construction costs. People will send us construction costs and say, this is what the property is worth. This is what I paid, and this is how much it cost to build the building. That is great information to have. It's a great starting point to try to figure out people's motivations and how much people are spending to build things. But dollar for dollar, we don't always use the cost to establish market value. There are plenty of times where a property owner will over improve their property for their own specific use. And that would not fall under a typical market participant. So if you have a property owner that needs special air filtration because of what they're manufacturing, that would cost more money to build that industrial building, but it might not translate on the open market to what a typical market participant would purchase. So construction cost alone is not how we base market value. Um, Moving on, appraisers are subject to a uniform standard of professional practice. We call it USPAP. It is our rule book. We must follow this rule book. All appraisals are written to USPAP standards. The main thing that you should understand and that we do, the appraisers are independent and impartial. We are not allowed to be advocates for anybody, not the buyer, not the seller, the lender. Everything we do has to be impartial and objective. And that is a requirement for all appraisals, commercial or residential. As part of the appraisal process, we will analyze all aspects of the property. We will do a site inspection. Lawrence, I came out and met you, I believe, at the property. It's a walkthrough. We take photos. We might take measurements. We are not building inspectors. We're not crawling into spaces looking at the electrical hookups, but we're there to get a general idea of the condition of the property. We'll ask questions of the owner or whoever's there, the real estate agent, asking about any recent renovations, any required renovations, and that helps us get an idea of the overall quality and condition of the property. Other parts of the appraisal, we must use PAP requires us to analyze the ownership history. We need to know who's occupying the building if it's not vacant. We need to know about the tenants. Is it an owner occupant? Is it leased? If it's leased, we want to review copies of all the leases. We'll ask for any LOIs or any listings. We like to talk to the real estate agents and get an idea of what types of tenants they're looking to put into a property, who's interested in leasing this space, um, what the asking rents are. We will always ask what the rental rate structure is. Is it modified gross? Is it triple net? Meaning, are the tenants paying their own utilities? Is the landlord picking up utilities? And we need that to be very specific. Which utilities are being paid by the tenant? Which is being paid by the landlord? So that we can make an analysis of the rental rate and make a fair comparison to other comparable rentals when we get to that point in the appraisal. We're required to analyze a 3-year sales history. If it's listed, if it's sold recently, we need to know what the conditions of the sale were. Um, we will ask for any copies of pending contracts. All of these things are required from the appraisal standpoint, from those USPAP requirements to be analyzed in the report. So we cannot skip these things. If a property is partially occupied, we'll talk about things like leasing, maybe how long it might take to lease up the property, what kind of tenants we think might go in there. Um, sorry. So these are things, all of the things I just said are really things that real estate agents can help appraisers with. You guys have access to a lot of this information, and we rely on real estate agents and brokers and owners to help us get that information so that the more information we have when appraising a property, the more accurate the appraisal is going to be. I can't tell you how many times I've finished an appraisal report and an owner has come back to me and said, "Why didn't you talk about XYZ?" And I'm like, "Well, you never told us about that." And that can have a big impact on the concluded value depending on what information wasn't communicated. So we do ask a lot of questions, and when we don't get the information, it can have an impact on the concluded market value of a report. I'll get another thing we will ask real estate agents and owners if it's, tell us about the rent. Well, it's rented. It's $20 a square foot. Okay, we need some more information than that. We need to know when it was rented, when it expires. If a lease is about to expire and if the tenant's not renewing, that's something that is going to change in the report. Can the owner get more higher rent now when they go back out to release this property? Are they going to get less rent because the market has changed? If the tenant is going to renew, we need to know what the escalation will be because it might not be at market. So it's not enough to say, oh, it's leased at $20 a square foot. These are questions that we need answered in order to make the best analysis possible. We also will always ask, like I said, about what expenses are covered, and that can make a really big difference. A triple net lease where the tenant pays the rent directly to the landlord, but then pays all the expenses to the utilities and the taxes, they pay them all themselves. That is a significantly different lease than a gross lease where the tenant pays, they could pay 10, 12, $15 more in a gross lease all to the landlord and don't have to pay any expenses after that. So we need to know what that rent is and how it's structured in order to make a comparison and put an accurate value on the property. Other parts of the appraisal report, we will talk about the market area and do hopefully an in-depth market analysis that talks about the regional and local economy, a specific submarket. If your property is an office building or an industrial building, a lot of market reports will break down their areas by, let's say, the I-78 corridor or the greater Princeton area. And so we need to identify those markets and we will summarize them in the reports. Are vacancy rates going up? Are they going down? Where's rental rates been over the past so many quarters? We will also reach out to the local planning board to see are any site plan applications, anything new coming into the inventory. If there's 3 new large industrial buildings being built, that could have an impact on absorption or vacancy rates over the next couple of years. So we will have that is all part of an appraisal report. Um, the report will talk about the underlying zone because that is what can determine the legally permitted use. So we'll talk about if we're appraising land, then we need to go through what could actually go there, what's legally permitted, how big of a building can you build, what kind of setbacks would you require. All of this goes into an appraisal report. Um, Once we get done explaining the property, we have a very specific formula that's called the highest and best use of the appraisal report. And we need to do this. USPAP requires we do this in a very specific manner. First, we talk about what is legally permissible. What can we put there? Is there a zone? Are there zoning restrictions? Are there easements on the property? Are there legal restrictions on the property? What can physically fit there? How big of a building can you build? What's financially feasible? So maybe you could put a 800,000 square foot industrial building, but like I said, if there's already 3 more industrial buildings coming online, that might not be a financially feasible uh, development for that site at this time. And then maximally productive. So that all comes together to say what is really the highest and best use on that site. Once an appraisal gets through all of that and concludes the highest and best use, we jump right into the valuation section. So this is the sales comparison approach. Probably very familiar for real estate agents. This principle of substitution. If you could buy, what a buyer won't pay more than what a comparable alternative, right? So if you've got 3 buildings out there, they're not going to pay more than what they can pay for something that's similar or comparable. What an appraiser does is we select the comparable sales. We go out and we try to find what sales we believe are the most comparable to a property. So if we're looking at an office building, ideally you'd find similar size buildings in a similar area with a similar lease status. So if you have a vacant bank building, you're not going to compare that to a multi-tenant leased office building. If you have a multi-tenant leased office building, you might not compare that to an owner-occupied, smaller property that couldn't support multiple tenants in it, wouldn't be able to be subdivided up. So we need to find sales that are what we call as comparable as possible. And the only way we can do that is to call the real estate agents and ask them about the sales. We need to know. So I'm sure most of you have received phone calls from real estate appraisers asking to confirm sales, and it's a hugely important part of our process. When I call, I always ask, is it was it listed for sale on the market? How long was it on the market for? What types of offers did you have? Were they for owner occupancy, or were they investors looking for new investments? Um, were there any contingencies or concessions that influenced the price? These are things we need to know in order to make a fair comparison. If we can't get this information, we might have to exclude comps that could have been comparable, but we couldn't confirm the information. Or if we don't get all the information when we call, we might include a sale that maybe shouldn't have been included for reasons that were not communicated to us. So it's really important that we have these phone calls with the real estate agents and other market participants. I mean, we will try to reach out to buyers and sellers, but our best contact is the real estate agent. They're usually the ones that will answer the phone and talk to us sometimes. So we do rely on that communication to get this information. Um, it's also true for leases. When we call for comparable leases, I will try to ask the questions I already said. Yes, the rental rate is great, but when did it start? When is it expiring? Are there escalations? Was there any free rent? What TI allowances were given? All of that goes into helping establish either the market sale price in a sales comparison report, or determining the market rent in an income capitalization approach. So we do rely on real estate agents to help us with this information. It might seem like we ask a lot of questions, but they're important. They're important questions to get the answers to. Well, the other things we'll ask about is financing. Is it a mortgage? Was there seller financing? I know interest rates are high. We've seen some seller financing out there that has influenced sale prices. And if we don't know that, it might look like the market is doing something different than we think it is, because we didn't ask if there was seller financing involved or any special financing involved. We'll also ask maybe if there's a 1031 exchange that might have some unusual motivation. Sometimes you have a sale and then the seller leases back the property. That is a good information to know, because that can influence what they're renting it for or what they sold it for. And it might not be a, a market transaction. It might be, but we have to find out. We can't just assume. Um, so that's all part of the sales comparison approach. We try to find our best sales. We try to make a comparison. We adjust for different aspects. We will adjust for things like location, size, the age of the building, condition. There might be some market conditions depending on when the sale sold versus what your effective date of the appraisal is. And of course, occupancy. Is the building occupied? Is it vacant? Is it leased? If it's leased, we will ask for a cap rate or an NOI if that's available, to help us further identify what's going on in the market. So that kind of sums up the sales comparison approach. Income approach is a little more complicated, but similar. We again reach out and try to get comparable rentals and establish a market rent with all of the same questions we already went through. But after that, we have to estimate a vacancy, and we will rely on the market analysis that I talked about previously. We will look at what the actual subject vacancy is, and we will use that to eventually take the rental rate, subtract the vacancy, get to effective gross income. I don't want to get too detailed there. And then we need expenses. And that is also part of our confirmation process. How do we get expenses? We ask for the subject property expenses, but we use comparable expenses too. We reach out to the market and say, hey, you've got these 3 office buildings and they're very similar, hoping that somebody will share the expense information with us so we can make a comparison across the board. When you have a property that's owner occupied, they almost never share the expenses with us because they are combined with other things. So when we're looking at expenses, we only want expenses for the real estate. But a property that's owner occupied, let's say they have a plumbing supply company, they will have their expenses will also include their sales expenses, their salaries to their employees. They don't always separate the real estate expenses from the business. So we do rely on comparable expenses to help us in those situations. And that is difficult information to get. So we ask for that and we don't always get it. Um, but after that, you get your net operating income, and then we have to determine a capitalization rate. And this is also something we rely on market reports, comparable sales. If a broker or owner or whoever will report the cap rate in the sale, we would like to confirm that. We use a combination of, like I said, market reports, verification, um, and other calculations to conclude a cap rate. An incorrect cap rate can change value significantly. So it's very important that when we ask for cap rates, we actually get real information, hopefully from knowledgeable sources. That's what we try to do. And that is how we get to the value for an income approach. The last approach is the cost approach. It's not used as much as others. This is for special purpose properties. Maybe you're selling a school or a church. We use it for car dealerships a lot. And I'm trying to think, car dealerships is the big one for bank financing that you would use a cost approach on. This is when, especially for car dealerships, the underlying land is worth significantly more as a percentage of the building than other typical properties because of the inventory parking. So a cost approach, you get an underlying land value first, and then build the building on it, and sort of estimate depreciation and conclude a value as the cost approach. It's not done for typically for industrial properties or income producing properties. This is not a good way to value things. But it is necessary for special purpose properties and things where maybe the underlying land is just a higher percentage of value compared to the improvement on the site. Once all that is done, we try to reconcile the approaches. We do not average the approaches. We make a determination which approach is more relevant to the property. An income producing property, the income approach is going to be the most relevant. A car dealership, you might look at the sales and the cost and try to reconcile it. So, depending on the purpose of the appraisal, the ownership, and other aspects of the subject property will determine which approach is given the most value. So, all that being said, you can see that what we do is incredibly it's complicated, and there's a lot of details that go into this report. But if the property information or if the market information isn't the more accurate this information is, the better the appraisal is going to be. And we do rely on not just real estate agents, but we rely on a lot of people, different people, to help us get that information. But one of the most important is real estate agents, buyers, sellers, brokers, and agents, uh, to get the most accurate information we can in order to put the most accurate value on a property. Um, I don't want to keep talking. Are there any questions right now about what we do and how your participation is helpful in this process?
Firstly, thank you, Miriam, for giving us the full detailed version
Of
of
course.
how this whole thing works. That was that was good to
Long.
know. Secondly, my question is, do you guys have like a range that you stay in between, right? So I've heard, right, that appraisers will stay between like if it's between 5 to 10,000, it'll praise. If it's lower than that, like they won't appraise it, like for certain situations.
No, no. What
Uh,
do you mean by 5 or 10,000? You mean a market
for
value?
like if we're appraising for like a mortgage, for example, and the mortgage amount is only going to cover, let's say they only cover in 500,000, and it has to appraise for 500,000, or else anything lower than that, you know. So let's say it appraises for 495 or 490, the appraisal will still, they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll let that slide, and let the bank still, let the lender be approved for that amount. Is that something that you're aware of or heard of?
Okay, so I think I understand the question. I will say that about less than 50% of the time does somebody, and they're not supposed to, does somebody tell us what the mortgage amount is? And we're not
Hmm.
supposed to ask. Well, not supposed to ask. Well, it's again, so that would be part of being an advocate, right?
Okay.
If we are saying this appraisal has to come in at X dollars or they're not going to get their mortgage, that we have now become an advocate for the buyer or the seller or the mortgage company, and that is against our professional obligation.
Hmm.
So no, I've never personally turned in a report that I thought, well, I'm not going to turn this in because they're not going to get their mortgage. Like, I'll
Right.
turn in the report to the bank whether I think they're going to get their mortgage or not. And I will
Right.
say a lot of the times I don't know if they're going to, that's not, that information is not presented.
Hmm.
The rest of the time, you will get an owner or somebody that will, when you ask for property information, they will sneak that in and they will say, yeah, here's our rent roll, here's our expenses, here's the mortgage sheet, here's what we're doing. And they'll throw that
Hmm.
in thinking that that will influence our appraisals, but it really isn't supposed to.
Ah, I got
Does
what you're
that
saying.
answer your question?
Yes, it does answer my question.
Okay.
So essentially it doesn't have, it's not that type of situation where it's like, oh yeah, well we'll appraise it because we know the lender and all that kind of things. Like you said, impartial, unbiased, unadvocated.
Yeah, it is. And for a lot of the banks we work for, the bidding process is um, confidential. So we bid. So the banks reach out to their list of approved appraisers, and they say, "We need this office building. How much will you charge us to appraise this office building?" The bids are submitted, and they're supposed to be confidential. So in theory, the banks will choose the lowest fee to
Hmm.
appraise the property. I don't work for the bank, so I don't know what happens on the other end. It's very
Hmm.
possible that they do pick and choose. I know there are some banks that prefer some appraisers for certain property types because they
Hmm.
know that they're going to write the best appraisal for that special purpose property. So I'm not on the back end and I don't see that. But we're it's supposed to be based on fee and hopefully just experience, but not on what you're going to do for the lender.
Hmm. So you guys don't have anything to just not knowing about the mortgage situation. You guys don't get any of that information, or you're not. Well, should I say you're not really supposed to know that information?
Yeah, when the banks send us, so the banks hire us and they'll give us property information. It's actually, the banks don't give us any, very little property information. If you recall, I think all I knew was that it was an office building with a dentist.
Yes.
I knew nothing. They literally gave us no information. And then we have to pull that information from the market. We'll have owners say to us, I sent all that to the bank. Like when we ask for, it's going to be faster if you just send it back to me. The bank doesn't send us a lot of information, and they don't send us the more, like, they don't tell us what the mortgage is or what the yeah, they don't tell us what the mortgage is going to be because it just because the sale price is whatever $1 million, that doesn't mean the mortgage could be anything based on what they, you know, what their deal is with the banks. They don't tell us.
Okay. I guess that answers Ruby's question. Another question is, how advantageous, if any, is for a seller to conduct a pre-listing appraisal of their residential property before going into market?
So I'm not a residential appraiser. Can you tell me what a pre-listing appraisal is?
Like basically like getting like getting appraisal, getting the home appraised before you put it on the market.
Okay. As a so I'm not a so I don't work as a real estate agent. I have people in my office that do both, or agents and appraisers, but that's not me. And I don't do residential, but I will say, and that limited knowledge I have, I don't know. It's very different. Deciding on an asking price for a residential property is not probably based on a appraisal. Like that is a lot to do with
Mm,
how you're going to negotiate, how you're going to bring people in. Should you go low to attract people? Should you go high because those parts, that's what you guys decide. And I don't have any, I don't have any knowledge on that.
Hmm.
The appraisal, I suppose if you're worried about, if the, I'm not, I guess my short answer is I don't know. I think if you have some buyers don't need appraisals, right? They're coming in with
Hmm.
cash and it might be a waste of time or money to go get that appraisal because you might not need it. And then on the other hand, if you think maybe you've been burned a few times because you went under contract and the appraisal came in not helpful,
Yeah.
maybe you would want to. I really can't speak to that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We all
So
can't know
long answer
everything,
to say
right?
I
It's okay.
can't answer.
No, no, no. It's okay. I would say that, with an appraisal versus market value, it's completely different. An appraisal is not necessarily going to give you what market value is going to give you because market value could be higher than the appraised value. In in a lot of cases, I would say, especially with residential, appraisals tend to come in a little bit lower. Market value tends to go a little higher, especially the market that we're dealing with people still paying above asking and all that stuff like that. So,
Okay.
getting an appraisal before uh, getting appraisal before you list the property just gives you an idea of what the value of the property is. It doesn't tell you what it compares to the other homes that sold and are active and things like that. So I would think that still doing a CMA as opposed to just getting a pre-listing appraisal would still be the best way to go about that.
Well, sounds good.
Miriam's like, yeah, that sounds good actually.
Yeah. Again, not a real estate agent.
She's like, that's exactly what I was gonna say. If any of you guys want to chime in real fast and give your thoughts on what you think about that, that would be great too. I do see we have Professor Jeff Fetzko here as well. We have Nina Sampit here. If you guys have any experience with using or doing a pre-listing appraisal, jump right in.
Morning. I was listening with interest to your comments, and I think you're right. We look at not only, the properties that have sold very recently, but we might even know that there's some sales that are in the wind that haven't been recorded yet. I
Mhm.
remember I had a property that I think the CMA came up with a price of 600,000, but there had been some very recent sales in the neighborhood. Well, actually, a next door neighbor that sold in the 650 range. So we actually had to sort of do a modification. If you've ever gone to the seminars that are put on, his name escapes me now, the guru of appraisers in New Jersey, he talks about trying to look at trends, a trend analysis. And if you know for a fact that even though you can't justify it with the CMA, with actual sales in the last 6 months, that you know that there are, a couple of sales coming up that are selling for 50,000 higher, it's important to consider that. I don't think that kind of data would be included in an appraisal. But
Mhm.
when you're doing a CMA, you want to look at not only what's sold, but you want to you know, analyze what you know is happening in the market in terms of future sales that are anticipated. Sometimes
Mhm.
the agents don't want to tell you what it sold for, and you say, "Listen, I'm just using this to do a more advanced kind of CMA." And I think
Mhm.
those are the kinds of things that are actually more important to consider when you're doing trying to set a price, you know.
Mhm.
I
So.
will say, as part of the appraisal process, when we call real estate agents for comps, the ones that are chatty, and I do get a few that are very helpful,
Yeah.
and they will say, "Oh, that's what you're looking for? I've got two under contract right here." And some of them will share that information, and that information absolutely can go in an appraisal report,
Okay,
and it can
great.
be used as comps or additional analysis, depending on how you want to write it up. But our office will put them in as a comp and we'll if they gave us enough information when it went under contract, if they'll give us the price, and we rely on it to agree that we can, depending on how much information we can confirm about it. But yes, if it but we can only get that information when we talk to somebody because it hasn't
Mm,
closed,
Right.
so there's no record of it.
Right.
And we don't love to rely on active listings because they can fluctuate so much. They're for our
Yeah.
purposes, they're not
Yeah.
great. But
mm,
yes, if somebody will share that information, we will use it if appropriate. Yeah.
I'm just saying, I think the difference with the CMA is, we maybe have to look at as many sources of information as we can to
hmm
come up with that number. But then you get into the next phase, which is how do you price it? Some people want to price it 3 to 5% below what they think it will sell to, entice buyers to come out and drive
hmm
the price up. I've always used that strategy, and it's really never failed, um, unless the number that we were using was a number that the seller came up with.
Right.
If if the agent comes up with a number, then you look at your strategy. You're never going to price it for higher
Uh,
than the number that you think it will sell at. But the idea of pricing it for lower, uh, they call it the rate pricing strategy.
yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. Now, talking the seller into the right pricing strategy is another
There's
problem.
another
But
story.
you have to encounter. But I think those of you who have used it, use that approach, have recognized that you end up with more money at the end.
Yeah. We do have a question. Why is land so difficult and or potentially be complicated? Is it because of comps, environmental, zoning, wetland? Probably all of those things.
Yeah, so yeah, we were talking about this a little before the class this started. Vacant land is difficult because you need to go through the highest and best use process very, very carefully because there's nothing on the site to help you lead down a path.
Mm,
So, what is legally permissible? You have to really understand the underlying zone. You have to pull, if you have title reports are great. If there's any um, easements or other restrictions on the land that you don't know about, that could have a real influence on how you value valuing it maybe incorrectly if that's not communicated to you. Again, then you would go into what's physically possible. Like I said, maybe you could build the 800,000 square foot warehouse on it, and that would be great. Maybe 2 years ago, that would have been a great idea. But now we're starting to see industrial flatten out a little bit. Maybe there's too much industrial already in the pipe works. So this analysis just keeps getting more and more in depth when it comes to vacant land. Um,
mm,
and then a lot of times you don't have environmental reports, wetlands information. And so the due diligence to go into a vacant land report is just much higher than a property that's improved. Not that I don't say it's higher, but harder to get the information. Not everybody has a wetlands LOI on a vacant land property. So
mm,
you might not know that. And
I, I once had a steep slope
mhm.
property that required a $7,000 engineering study to tell us what size house we could build on the lot.
So yeah, so that's
Wow.
and some people aren't going to pay that depending
Right.
on what the purpose of the appraisal is. It's
Mm,
we do, like I said, we do a lot of open space preservation. So you have parcels that are probably never going to be developed. So none of that due diligence is ever going to get done because nobody's going to pay for it.
So how does that work? Now that you say that about open field conservancy, how would that just okay? That's like a different
Be a
because
different
nothing
topic.
because if nothing's going to be built there, right? And you don't have anything to really base this off of, how can you say that it's going to be worth this much? I guess that's
So mostly it's based on the underlying zone.
okay.
And then a highest and best use is either going to be some kind of development,
Mhm.
or if it's fully wet or there's other reasons it can't be developed, there the highest and best use might be recreational land, and there are a ton of recreational land sales out there, so that's actually not that difficult to do.
Okay.
And then or it's like I said, so either build something, recreational land, those are your two, and then or a speculative parcel. Like we don't, this has some wetlands, we don't know. And in the ideal situation, and they exist, there are sales of similar speculative land that don't have site plan approvals, where nobody's done any work, and the
Mm,
buyer is just taking a shot. And
mm,
that's its own market. And they're harder to find those sales because those are risky. That's risky behavior for people to do,
mm,
but they do it. And so you
mm,
might have to go outside of the market. You might like farther away. You might have to go older and try to make
mm.
adjustments. It's not easy.
Yeah. Do
So
you
those
actually
are
have to walk the land?
different clients require different levels of inspection.
Oh,
USPAP does not require any inspection.
oh,
But
okay.
so at all banks, every bank we work for, you have to inspect the property and take photos. For land, I've had some people say, let's hike across, put your boots on and let's go for a walk. Or no, you can just do it from the road and rely on aerial maps and soil maps and things because that's more important than
Mm,
hiking the property. So it's the client will determine what type of inspection is required.
right. Another question. Does the appraisers know if they are doing appraisal for refinance or sale? I think we answered that one. Is there a different approach taken for the same?
So there shouldn't be a different approach. I will say uh, we have to know if it's for a sale because USPAP requires we discuss any pending contracts. So
Mm,
that's a requirement that we know if it's under contract. Sometimes the bank does not tell us that, and we call up the whoever the contact is, and we find out at that point. So
mm,
we sometimes have to ask what sound like stupid questions because it sounds like we don't know anything, which we don't. So we have to call and say, "Is it under contract?" And then they'll say, "Yeah." How come you don't know that? Like, because your bank didn't tell us. Like that's why we're asking. So yeah, it's we don't always know at the start, but
mm,
we have to find out before we finish.
mm. Would you recommend that agents bring comps to appraisers?
Um, that's fine. We always want the more information an appraiser gets, the better.
Mm,
I'm always happy to look at comps. Sometimes I'll ask if they don't bring. Sometimes I will ask them for comps.
mm,
I will say about 50% of the time I get comps that are not comparable. So, and then they get a little annoyed. Why didn't you use the comp? So, a recent example was a vacant land parcel, and they said, here's three parcels that are right in the same town, but they were completely different zoning. I
mm,
couldn't use them because they're not comparable to what could be built on the subject lot. Still good
mm,
information to have so that I could anticipate questions, or I can put things in the report that says we did note that there were these three sales in the town, but we couldn't
mm,
use them because of this. So I'm always happy to look at any information that anybody wants to give me.
mm.
More information is better than less.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns? I
Yeah, I
think
have
this was,
one.
there we go.
So my question is, since you need a lot of questions from us, is there a list of questions we can, when we go walk through or with the clients, we can just note it down? Is there anything like that?
The questions are very property specific, so I
Mhm.
don't have anything like that. I
Oh.
tend to
Mm,
meet with whoever I'm meeting with, the real estate agent, the owner,
Mhm.
and then I will follow up after the inspection with an email that says, nice meeting you. As a reminder, here are the questions, or here's the property information we requested. Please let me know what you can and can't provide. And I'll follow up through an email. But each property can be so different that I just don't have a pre-prepared list of questions. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it is because I just want, because I'm a new, so maybe my question is weird, but I just want to know, like, if I'm going with the client and if I'm seeing something is odd, there is a checklist, we can just write it down, note it down, something That's what my
Well,
question was.
when you're out with your clients and you are, doing your CMA for a property, the appraisal isn't something that's really on your mind. That's more something for the lender to deal with. So when it comes to getting or doing an appraisal for the property, 9 times out of 10, you don't really have much to really answer or go through unless the appraiser just needs some more or wants some more information from you, which is going to vary. So there isn't really a thing to look out for or to check out for when you're doing or getting an appraisal. It's more so about making sure that your CMA that you did to list the property and your pricing is as accurate as you possibly can by using the most accurate comps, I would say. But as far as a checklist, like she said, it's very property specific, and it depends on what that appraiser needs as far as information goes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Anyone else? Questions, comments, concerns? I learned a lot today.
Oh,
Good.
I would just offer one additional, thing. A lot of people don't look at RPR too often when they're doing
Hmm.
CMAs, but Realtor Property Resource is something everybody has available to them. A lot of times, they come up with their own values for properties, and if you go and dig into the comps that they've used to come up with those numbers, you might find some comps that you didn't see,
Hmm.
and so I think it's again, it's kind of important to dig in and use as many resources as you can to help you come up with the right numbers for these properties.
Right. Idrissa, you had a question?
Yes, I was going to ask her if she doesn't work for the bank, so who she work for a private lender? They work for private lenders?
Oh, that's a good question. So no, I work for a small real estate appraisal firm. There is a owner and two appraisers, that's it. And we are hired by banks through that process I talked about, like a bidding process, but we also work for municipalities. We do private uh, just we'll have private clients. We just did a big portfolio because somebody was getting a divorce and needed all their properties appraised to get a divorce settlement. When
Oh,
we work for the we work for municipalities for eminent domain, a lot of what would you say, eminent domain for road widenings and other projects where they have to take land from
yes,
property owners.
yes.
So we don't. I work for just this company called Sockler Realty Services. It's a small company, and we are hired by these individual
Oh,
entities
okay.
to appraise for lots of different reasons. We'll do tax appeals, um, like bank financing, a lot of. But like I said, we've been doing a lot of land preservation as well. So we've been working for municipalities trying to prevent warehouses being built.
Yes.
That's been a lot of it, trying to stop the warehouses from being built.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Cool, cool, cool. I thought this was a very informative spotlight session. I thank you, Miriam, for coming on and giving us your great expertise on how you get to your numbers.
I hope it was helpful.
Yes, always very helpful. So, you guys have anything else for Miriam, Jeff, for me?
I have one question. Yeah, and this is just something I always wondered, and I've asked a couple of appraisers this question, but there is a lot of times a variance in between the appraised value and the assessed value.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times people say, "Oh, I'm going to appeal my taxes. I'm going to get an independent appraisal." And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times that doesn't really help that much because the assessment very often is lower than the appraised value. Have you been approached to use appraisals to help people try to lower their property tax?
So we do a lot of work. We work for both sides. We can work for the
Yeah.
municipality when they want to defend their assessment against an appeal, or we will sometimes work for a property owner who thinks their assessments are too high and wants to appeal their taxes. In those scenarios, the tax assessor will take they'll normally get two appraisal reports, one written for the township, one written for the property owner, and
Mhm.
they will look at them, and they are market value appraisal reports. They are based on current sales or everything I went through. So um, they are not how the assessment was derived. They are based on market value. Assessments are not based on the actual assessment is not based on market value. It's a little bit different. The way tax assessments go actually are they're done in like these mass appeal. They do like a mass appraisal where they use statistical analysis to set assessments. So if you think it's wrong, we come in and actually do a specific real estate appraisal of the property. And then the assessor gets the two reports, and then the lawyers they argue it out and try to come to a resolution. And that sometimes they do, and sometimes it goes to a judge, and this can take a very long time. But yes, we do both of those scenarios.
Hmm.
You know,
That's interesting.
I appealed my own. I appealed my own after I'd done an addition on my house. My taxes went way up, higher than I anticipated, and I did some research and I found out they had miscalculated square footage in my house.
Mhm.
So I was able to bring it to the tax, court in Somerville. I don't know if it's a court or just a tax board, and
Mhm.
um, and I just pointed to. I had two pieces of graph paper. I said, "Listen, you miscalculated the square footage." And I handed Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and they're like, "Ooh, yeah, we did." So, I mean, it was like sometimes the answers are very simple. I think sometimes they're very
Yeah.
difficult, but I always say, start with the simple and work your way into the more difficult because a lot of times you can find the problem, without doing too much work.
Well, by the time we get involved, they've
Yeah,
already tried,
we
or
already tried
they've
all that.
tried
Yeah.
something, right? And so
Yeah.
they don't spend money and hire attorneys and appraisers until they've, given up any other forms of appeal. So we only come in at the end of that. And but yeah, we did a lot, especially during the when all the prices, residential went up so much,
Went up,
a
yeah.
lot of townships
Mm,
started to what do they call that? They call it like a not a negative. There's a name for it where they go back and raise the assessment based on the market. It doesn't happen often, and
mm.
so we did quite a few of those, especially industrial buildings that appreciated in value so much over that time frame. And yeah, there was some fighting. You know.
Great. Well,
All
thank you.
right. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again, Miriam, for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys learned a lot today. I totally learned a lot today. And I'm gonna take all this information with me going forward. So again, you guys have a great weekend. Thank you again for all coming, and I will talk to you all soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.